You mentioned kind of the intra-party warfare / divide on this issue that the president has been trying to navigate. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who obviously has been one of the most vocal of those saying he shouldn't have done the strikes. She said this to Manu Raju just a few moments ago. Take a listen.
We saw President Trump's measured response, and his message on Truth Social is exactly the same messaging that we elected him for. He wants peace, he wants this to end, and he's going to urge Israel that it's time to end.
I believe she said that to Manu before the president posted about the potential ceasefire. Of course, that comes a few hours, I think, after she posted on on X. It feels like a complete bait and switch to please the neocons, Walker's military-industrial complex contracts, and neocon TV personalities that MAGA hates and who were Trumpers.
Yeah, well, that's stupid. I mean, part of the thing is we just, a month ago, Laura Loomer purged the last alleged neocons from the White House. There are no neocons, whatever she thinks a neocon is, other than some sort of perfidious bagel-snarfing warmonger. There are none in the White House, right? They've all been purged. Anyone who's suspected of being a neocon has been purged. This isn't the Nikki Haley people making these calls. This is Trump and his team doing this. And I personally think that, like, Marjorie Taylor Greene is in a position, Tucker Carlson is in a position where they're talking as if they have a massive base of support behind them for their position, when in fact the polls don't show that. Israel is sort of a special case for a lot of evangelical Christians. A lot of MAGA types give a lot of allowances. And moreover, at the end of the day, Trump was kind of right. I mean, I don't like it, but Trump was right when he says, I get to decide what America First means, because ultimately the MAGA movement is a cult of personality, and you can't sustain being off the team very long in that world.
For Democrats who have criticized a lot of elements of what we've seen over the course of the last 72 hours, the one constant kind of outlier has been Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, who said this. Take a listen.
For me, that's not a war. That was a very limited military exercise, and it struck that, and then that's where we're at. So really, it really wasn't about unconstitutional or it's anything like that.
Just his position right now.
So I think that the concern, and it is, when the action happened on Saturday, I think a lot of people were calling it a war, including President Trump. One of the things that Democrats were really worried about was escalation. And they were worried about going into a conflict and, as you said, making this like Iraq all over again. And so I think the vast majority of the Democratic Party is not with John Fetterman, because we do not want another war. And so I do think that John Fetterman is, especially right out of the gate, kind of saying that he didn't see it as a war. We didn't know where this would go. We didn't know we still don't know where this is going to go and what the next few days are going to look like. And I think sort of jumping to conclusions like that is not smart when you don't exactly know what the dynamics are going to be in a few days.
Just real quick, because we got like 10 seconds left.
Yeah.
Fetterman's role inside the party right now.
Yeah, I think the Democratic Party is struggling to where Fetterman is at. I do think that there is a big question Fetterman is going to have to face about whether he's going to seek re-election and stay in the Democratic Party. Yeah. I think he needs to think about his mental health first and his health overall, and whether he wants to do that, because it's obviously a big job, and I don't know where he's going to stand on that.
Top Republicans on Capitol Hill swiftly rallying behind President Trump following the strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear strikes on Saturday. But for a few outspoken Republicans who drew a line in the sand, take Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, a fierce Trump ally who in no uncertain terms said the military operation, quote, feels like a complete bait and switch on the MAGA agenda. Minutes before the president's ceasefire announcement, she said this.
I think what you're seeing is a very big divide in the MAGA base, and I think that's also something important to talk about, and I think it's generational. We've been lied to too many times, and I think it's right to be skeptical. But I think you're seeing a major divide in Republican voters.
Now, as a potential end to this conflict is on the horizon, the Congressman writes on social media, "Thank you, President Trump, for pursuing peace." I want to bring in former Democratic Congressman Joe Crowley, also here, CNN political commentator Brad Todd. I'll begin with you for a second, Brad, on this point, because it is worth flashing back for a second to remember what some Republicans in Congress had to say to President President Obama about his air campaign against Libya in 2011. Listen.
The Constitution is very clear. You don't go to war without a declaration.
This latest decision was taken without adequate consultation with Congress.
When you commit U.S. troops and resources to combat, you should consult with Congress.
So let's just say this was a Democrat ordering this operation. Would there have been the type of support or silence?
Well, you know, in 2013, Barack Obama established a red line in Syria, and the first people in Congress to stand up and say, we'll back you up on this, were Tom Cotton and Mike Pompeo. They were Republicans who felt like he was doing the right thing in Syria, and they wanted to make sure that he knew that they had his back, and they offered to help enlist other Republicans who would help him.
The latter, of course, on the outs with now President Trump, but we'll put that yes for a second.
It's been a while. It's been a while. I think Congress always, the leaders are always going to want to be consulted more. That's the role of the push-pull of the division of power between the Congress and the president. But I think in the end here, what I'm most surprised about is, you know, Chuck Schumer voted against the nuclear deal with Iran. I don't know why Chuck Schumer is not out here endorsing what President Trump just did. It's surprising to me. Steny Hoyer did. Steny Hoyer said the world's safer. I'm surprised we've not seen more Democrats who've long wanted Iran to not have a nuclear weapon to praise President Trump.
But Congressman, I mean, when you were in office, you expressed support and skepticism over the president's war powers. But he says they want to consult more. Is it something as simple as that, or should there have been more an in-depth consultation, as in it's Congress's right to declare it?
I actually think politically, the president probably should have shifted some of this onto Congress.
Why?
Because you own it all. Maybe that's what he wanted to do. You know, he saw Israel being successful, and he wanted in on the game. And so he takes this move, but he controls it solely. There's been no vote. I'm not saying there will never be a vote. It could be months, it can be a year from now we can actually do this again. But right now the president owns it solely. And I do think, though, you're right, Brad, I think both in the Republican and Democratic Party, there is a divide on these issues itself. There's not everyone seeing eye to eye on all this. I think when you have Democrats, Republicans who are sincerely concerned about the state of Israel, it's right to survive as a state, and the imminent threat that Iran may have posed to that and to the rest of the world can look at one way. But at the same time, the Constitution is clear that the Congress will declare war. This was a preemptive act. This was something that we were not attacked where the president went out and took this action. So I think there has been a clear crossing of that line again in terms of what is constitutional and what is not.
So what can Congress do about it?
Well, that's a good question, but when the president's party controls both houses, there's not a lot that Democrats can do at this point. They can try to use some procedures within the Senate, fewer in the House. There is more opportunity in the Senate for senators to express their dismay, but less in the House.
I mean, Democratic Congressman Alejandro Ocasio-Cortez speaking about impeachment as a solution. You've got Thomas Massie, who has his own views as well. I mean, Massie, of course, is facing a critique, shall we say, from President Trump on that point, saying that get this bum out of office ASAP. So, I mean,
the clock is ticking
there you
on
go.
Thomas Massie's political career.
The clock is perhaps ticking, but so is, in some ways, the unanimity among Democrats and Republicans. You've got some divide on these issues.
There certainly are. There's a small group of what I would call doves in the Republican Party, but it's the terrarium compared to the size of the garden that's the rest of the party. You know, CNN's polling last week showed that 69% of Republicans felt like strikes would be in order. I guarantee you now, after President Trump did them in a decisive way and did them successfully, that number of 69 is about 99. The only people who now think this was a bad idea are Thomas Massie and a few internet commentators on the Republican side. Strength is the new ideology of the Republican Party, and he demonstrated it.
Do you think, I mean, Massie stands alone in his viewpoints on that? I mean, obviously, you have to wonder if this is a bit of a slippery slope. If you are doing something preemptive and going around what Congress can do, does this start a trend that concerns all congresswomen and congressmen?
I think what the president did very quickly was to get right on Massie. He wanted to send a message to the rest of the members of Congress, especially the members of MAGA movement and the Republican Party. Get on the person right away who's outspoken against you. And he's done this before to Massie. Massie's been a target for
But he's strongly anti-Israel. He votes with AOC and the Squad every time on Israel. He votes like Bernie Sanders when it comes to this. There's just not a Republican who's ever been this anti-Israel in our memory.
What about Marjorie, not for the anti-Israel component, but what about Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments about feeling as though this is a bait and switch? Does that carry any weight?
Marjorie Taylor Greene was for it when it worked. And so I think that will continue to be the case. And I think, President Trump is comfortable with that. He's comfortable with taking bold decisions and knowing some people are going to get on board after it works. And that's a pretty good trait for a leader to have.
That's his comfort, but of course this is a United States with electorate.
And you mentioned impeachment, and I think there's a weariness there. I think the American electorate are very weary of impeachment.
We learned that the hard way too.
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, at the very same time, is Congress feckless? Does it have any role in this process? And again, Article 1 clearly states that the declaration of war must happen in the Congress, not in the presidency. I think they were concerned about the almighty president.
Right. They certainly were. Joe's right about where our founders were, but it's bedeviled Congress since 1968.
Yeah.
I don't know that we had an all's well that ends well clause of the Constitution, but we'll see. Joe, Brad, thank you both.